Plus, as always, some specials for you on the show. A ground report from the Golan Heights and Galilee in Israel, how the war in Syria has spilled into that country. China changes tack again with measured statements from the government. Are they worried that Prime Minister Modi will boycott BRICS like Obor? How do experts read the news signals? We'll talk about that. Also taking you to the US to witness the rare total solar eclipse. WION's Andy Rosgan standing by for the very latest from there. And the mystery of American warships colliding at sea, the second in less than 2 months. 10 sailors are missing. We'll bring you more on that. But first to the big announcement that is expected in just a few hours from now. After 16 years of war and many $billion spent, US President Donald Trump will announce the details of his Afghanistan strategy and South Asia policy in an address to the nation on Tuesday morning. That's Tuesday morning our time, Monday evening, US time. Details of the strategy are not known except to Trump's inner circle of defense and security advisors. But the Washington grapevine says it could involve a modest increase in US troop strength in Afghanistan. This would also be in line with the US military's preference for 3,000 to 4,000 troops who will add to the 8,400 already in that country. At this point, it's not clear what the extra troops will do there. Currently, US and NATO troops are only involved in training and support missions for the Afghan military. Trump spoke briefly about it after meetings in the Pentagon with his military brass.
Tremendous people, Pentagon, nothing like it. The job they do, absolutely incredible.
But we understand he's dissatisfied with the military. Earlier reports suggested that he was not happy with the Army's thinking on Afghanistan. He compared their advice to private sector consultants who got paid heavily for tendering bad advice. He suggested that the US commander in Afghanistan, General Nicholson, be removed. He also said that the US was losing the war in Afghanistan. And his now sacked strategic advisor, Steve Bannon, had recommended pulling out of Afghanistan completely, saying that this was not a war the US could win. Although Bannon is no longer in the White House, there is a view that he could bring even more influence to bear on Trump from the outside. The other view is that the US military brass is pushing hard for Trump to adopt a regional approach, meaning take into account Pakistan providing the Taliban sanctuaries on its soil and step up drone strikes in Pakistan against the Haqqani network. There's also a view that Trump could demand that India step up and assist the US in helping stabilize Afghanistan. Some of these issues may have already come up during discussions between the Indian and American national security advisors. New Delhi is unlikely to bite and may have offered some ideas of its own on Afghanistan. Joining us this evening on Gravitas is a very special panel. G. Parthasarathi, former High Commissioner to Pakistan, also former information advisor at the Prime Minister's office, with me in the studio this evening. Also with us from Washington, Jonathan Landay, National Security Correspondent at Thomson Reuters, and Ray Locker, National Security Editor with USA Today. Good evening to both of you and to Mr. Parthasarathi. Thank you for being with us on the show. Jonathan, let me begin with you. And we've discussed this on numerous occasions on this show as to what Donald Trump will decide when the time comes for him to declare his Afghanistan policy. What are you picking up?
Well, we expect that he will announce a modest increase in U.S. forces. They will be accompanied by a modest increase in other coalition forces. We know that a majority of his advisors, those are his security and defense advisors, favor this approach. We also expect that he will announce that U.S. troops will engage more closely and embed with smaller units of the Afghan military down to what's known as the Kandak level, that is the brigade level, bring them closer to the fighting. We expect that he is being pushed by some of his advisors to get tougher with Pakistan. One of those advisors is Lisa Curtis. She's a specialist on South Asia. She did a report before she entered the administration, before she entered the National Security Council as senior director for South Asia. She did a report with former Pakistani Ambassador Hussein Haqqani that recommended getting tougher with Pakistan, giving Pakistan the choice of getting tougher with the Haqqani network, closing sanctuaries for the Taliban, and unless they do start doing some of the things the Americans have been pressing for years for them to do, start a quiet conversation within the administration on perhaps designating Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism. That carries enormous economic costs for Pakistan if that was ever to happen. We don't know specifically that Ms. Curtis has convinced her boss, the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, who also spent time in Afghanistan, and their boss, President Trump, to adopt this approach. But we've seen some hints. In recent weeks, we saw the United States pressing for designation of Pakistani militant leader Hafiz Saeed, the reputed head of Lashkar-e-Taiba, to get him designated at the United Nations as an international terrorist. That failed. But then last week, out of the blue, the United States designated as an international terror organization Hezbollah Mujahideen, the Pakistani-supported, alleged Pakistani-supported militant group that's been fighting on India's side of Kashmir. That came out of the blue. The United States had years in which to do that, and yet suddenly last week that happened. So we expect something along those lines, perhaps, although, as you pointed out, there are no details have leaked at this point.
G. Parthasarathy, you've just returned from Afghanistan. What's the buzz there? What do they expect?
Well, I've returned from war, from the US and then from Afghanistan. Look, the sentiment is running very strongly against Pakistan. The Afghans have been pressing very hard, and they have given innumerable details of both the Haqqani network and the mainstream Taliban operating out of bases in Pakistan. There is no doubt about that. The Pakistani denials, nobody believes, either in Afghanistan or the US. I think broadly I'll go along with the previous journalist who said what he had to say. What I expect certainly is a tightening of the screws on Pakistan.
Okay.
Meaning a very clear warning that you will face shortages in economic aid, military supplies, even spare parts, which they need for their F-16s and the other American equipment. I expect, yes, the threat to be...
That's also pushing Pakistan closer to China. Is that something that the US has
The fact of the matter is, irrespective of what the US does, I think we in India should understand this.
Yeah.
Pakistan is an extension of Chinese power on the subcontinent. We have been fooling ourselves that that is not the case with the China lobby in India. Now, that will continue. So I don't think the Americans have any illusions on that score. Also, the Pakistanis help the Chinese by placing controls on Islamic terrorist groups which operate in Xinjiang and operate through Afghanistan. So the Pakistanis have that role for the Chinese, and China makes use of it. But I'm quite clear in my mind, it is going to be graduated. The screws will be turned slowly but surely to see if Pakistan falls in. What will Pakistan do? The Afghans believe they will again play the, oh, I'm so hurt and I'm doing my best and I'm also a victim of terrorism card. I don't think this American administration will buy that.
Okay.
So, yes, the pressures will grow. But remember, the US will always keep the door open for Pakistan.
You know, I ask this because Trump has we've seen some really tough talk from the US president, but he's almost always stopped short of following it up with action.
This time, I think the Secretary of State Tillerson, the McMaster, the National Security Advisor, the Defense Secretary Mattis, all have come out quite strongly. So this is unanimous.
Okay.
Steve Bannon had nothing about Afghanistan. Perhaps he doesn't know where it is located. But the fact of the matter is that he is opposed to American interventions abroad.
Yeah.
That is a broader policy. So that is Trump's core support. So I think what they will do is graduated expansion in the avoiding of combat loss casualties. What the Afghans tell me is they need more American air power, or at least to be given helicopter gunships by the Americans to manage it on their own. I am very clear in my mind that without Pakistani support, the Taliban cannot sustain itself. It is the Quetta Shura and, of course, the Haqqani Network, which is an internationally designated organization. At the same time, the Americans will push for the Taliban to cool off and some form of a dialogue between the Taliban and the Afghan government.
Okay. Ray Locker, I want to quote Trump and his team to put this in context for our viewers. Donald Trump said, I want to find out why we've been there for 17 years. Jim Mattis told the Senate panel, we are not winning in Afghanistan, and yet there is talk about adding more troops on the ground. What are you picking up?
Well, this is a pattern we've seen here for decades when it comes to Asian entanglements for the U.S. government. We look for reasons to kind of find a way to get a victory or to declare victory. This happened in Vietnam. It's happening again now. It's a gradualism where we'll probably get another 4,000 troops there. Their mission is ill-defined. We don't really know what's going to happen. This is being driven primarily from the Pentagon, from Defense Secretary Mattis, from the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, a 3-star general in the Army who's also served in Afghanistan. They know what they think they need. They know what they're hearing from the commanders there on the ground, and they're going to push for it. When it comes to Pakistan, I agree there will be some kind of gradual tightening of the screws against Pakistan. But what the realization always is that we need the Pakistanis to do things, and if we disengage or cut off the aid, then we lose whatever leverage we have. We also recognize that Pakistan plays a vital role for China in the region. Again, a policy that the United States has encouraged for decades, going back to the 60s and the 70s when President Nixon used Pakistan to accomplish the opening to China. So, we'll see some move, but in the overall scheme of things, I don't really know where it goes, and I don't think that in the next few years this will lead to somebody declaring victory for the United States.
Also joining us is Stephen Thankal, professor at American University, joining us from Washington. Good evening, Stephen. Not just the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS have also consolidated their position in Afghanistan. Is this policy decision coming too late?
Well, first let me say I haven't had the benefit of hearing what the other participants said because of technical difficulties, but I would say, certainly there's the case, and I was just in the region recently, that it's a strong sense the administration, at least at the top in terms of the president, wasn't as engaged as he could have been on this. I don't know if it's a question of too late. I think it's more a question of the fact that some of the structural problems that have been there for a long time remain there. We can plus up our forces and we can help Afghan special forces retake territory. I think the real questions are going to be whether the conventional military in Afghanistan can hold the territory, and more importantly, whether whatever we do on the military side is going to be linked up with some sort of a political strategy, that moves us towards reconciliation sooner or later. What our approach is going to be for a settlement. I think it's entirely unrealistic, and I don't think that there's very many who believe that the United States is going to be able to win. So this is really a question of being able to get to a negotiating table where the United States, I think, can withdraw most of its forces in a way that is acceptable to it. And I think that really means being able to keep a counterterrorism force for the foreseeable future to prevent Al-Qaeda and ISIS returns. Al-Qaeda and ISIS right now are on the back foot. It's the Taliban that is surging. So for me, when I look at this, I think this is very much about hedging against future returns by international terrorists.
Jonathan, Donald Trump has always said that America should pull out of the war in Afghanistan, and tomorrow, by all accounts, he's going to announce adding more troops. What have you heard about the theories about privatizing this war, getting private air force for one to fight for the Americans?
Actually, Mr. Trump has not called for the withdrawal of American troops. During the campaign, he actually talked about keeping some there because of Pakistan, in order to contain Pakistan's nuclear ambition. As far as the privatization proposal, that's gone nowhere. That was brought forward by Eric Prince. the former military contractor whose sister is a member of Mr. Trump's cabinet. She's the education secretary. That proposal was not, as I understand it, included in the formal packet of options that were presented to the president last week at Camp David by his top military and national security officials. However, Mr. Prince was all over American television, cable news, pushing his proposal. It allegedly or reportedly was brought into the mix by Mr. Bannon, but Mr. Bannon was dismissed, and that proposal has gone nowhere. One of the more important things I think was brought up by your last guest, and that is that we have not heard of any kind of new diplomatic initiative that needs to be linked with any kind of military strategy. The special position of the special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, that position in the State Department has been eliminated. The State Department is woefully undermanned. They are having their budget cut. And so it's not clear what kind of diplomacy this administration is planning to launch in conjunction with an increase in U.S. military on the ground. The theory, however, remains the same as it was as under the Obama administration. That is, they fight the Taliban to a stalemate, leaving them no other option but to go to the negotiating table. Well, that didn't work the last time, and it's not clear that's going to work this time because Pakistan, as other guests have pointed out, continue to provide sanctuary, allegedly, and arms and succor to the Taliban, to the Haqqani network, and they perhaps feel their oath, so to speak, by the diplomatic backing of China. So there's a lot of questions about where this strategy is going to go, whether it can succeed any better than previous attempts to bring the terrible tragedy of Afghanistan, which has been going on decades, to a close.
G. Parthasarathy, what about the larger role for India that is being talked about? Does India want to be doing more than it already is?
Well, I've come back. People are, I want to say this, Indians are welcome there. I was there, a group of Iranians was there when we were there, and they said, what is it that makes the Afghans so fond of you? I said, basically, we've concentrated on economic assistance and welfare of the people, electricity for Kabul, a parliament building, a dam which provides a lot of irrigation potential. That's been our focus. We have concentrated a lot on military training. Also, we have provided some helicopter gunships. Now, I think, frankly, I differ with our government on this. I think we should be more forthcoming when it comes to weapon supplies. And certainly to ensure that the helicopter gunships we provided function. Some of them are not doing that. So, yes, limited military involvement, large continuing economic aid. But the fact of the matter is, this will drag on if the Trump administration behaves like the Obama administration, to pretend Pakistan is doing nothing. And really every Afghan I spoke to, including some of their former intelligence chiefs, their military, everybody says the main problem is a section of the American establishment who refuse to recognize this. Mullah Mansour, the Taliban leader, was killed in an American drone strike in the heart of Balochistan, returning from Iran. So there are lots of people playing different games there. The Indian position is we will support the constitutional government, and we continue to do so economically, financially, to the extent we can. And really they say our aid program, if you talk to an ordinary Afghan, he'll say the ordinary school child has benefited from us because he or she get their midday meals from us. So I think we stick to that. But for the Americans, we would have to push to say, unless if you're going to pretend things are changing and your diplomacy is working, forget it. Go by what your military commanders on the field say. And from what the Afghans tell me, really the infiltration is increased. The support even for the Taliban in northern Afghanistan has grown. Leave alone what is happening in Helmand and the south bordering Pakistan. But I personally believe if the Americans stay the course, equip the Afghan armed forces properly and provide them air cover, you can reach a situation where the Taliban and Pakistan will realize the costs go up if American aid stops.
Right.
Then you can. But I don't think they should fall for this blackmail of Pakistan, the Americans, about the China factor. China will provide near commercial term loans, which will make Pakistan a basket case in the next 10 years. The real assistance they depend on is what comes from Western institutions like the World Bank.
Yes.
So I think if the US is prepared to turn the squeeze there, people will feel the pinch in Pakistan.
Ray Locker, I think it all boils down to troop strength, and as Democratic Senator Tim Kaine has been quoted as saying, the troop strength question is sort of cart before the horse. We spoke to former Afghan President Hamid Karzai a few months back, and I asked him this question: would adding troops on the ground help? And he said it'll have limited gains. So is the US government under Donald Trump looking at a comprehensive policy after having promised it for months, or are they just going to do, as Parthasarathi said, what the previous administrations have done, some token gestures of taking things forward, but not really?
Well, they say they were doing a comprehensive analysis and talking about that kind of strategy over the weekend. What we're hearing so far doesn't indicate that that's so. As some of the previous guests have mentioned, that, I mean, the State Department is crippled here. Tons of jobs have not been filled. They're not really a factor anywhere in town. When you hear anybody talking about what we're going to do, those voices aren't being heard. And that's unlike what happened in the previous administrations, Obama and George W. Bush, where those people were engaged and they were a factor. Now they're basically non-entities. So whether there's a discussion about a holistic approach, you know, people say that there is, but I haven't really seen it. And right now what we're looking at is mostly, you know, talk of 4,000 extra troops there and more counterterrorism work, not really much on the diplomatic end.
Stephen Thankal, you understand how the Taliban operates, and they have consolidated, as we've been saying, on the ground. So have the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS. And Donald Trump's understanding of these issues, considering that he's been embroiled in a lot of domestic controversies, is by most accounts very, very limited. We do not know what sort of advice he's getting. How hopeful are you that what is announced tomorrow is going to bring real change on the ground?
Well, first, I mean, I think it's important to distinguish what the Taliban has been able to accomplish between what Al-Qaeda has been able to accomplish. Al-Qaeda has been seriously degraded in the region, and actually ISIS has been seriously degraded over the last year as well. So you know, they're not doing well. The Taliban on the ground, yes, they are going from strength to strength. Militarily, they've seen real gains. They are, however, politically and internally fragmented, which potentially makes it more difficult to get to some sort of a negotiated settlement down the line, potentially makes it easier to get to a settlement with certain factions if they can be picked off. You know, both of those options entail risks. You know, am I confident that President Trump understands those nuances? No. Do I think that some of the people on his staff understand those nuances? Absolutely. You know, but this is not just a question. I think that, you know, the guests who have pointed out that the United States diplomatic corps and the State Department have been severely weak are absolutely right. I think that's a big part of the problem. I think another part of the problem is as always, you know, the military has shown up with a plan, and that can have appeal. But there's also the issue that I think we haven't been able to determine on our own end precisely what it is we want out of this. How forward-leaning is the United States prepared to be in terms of taking ownership of some sort of a process to get to a negotiated settlement? What is the minimum acceptable outcome for the United States in terms of Taliban involved in a future Afghanistan, in terms of being able to keep a counterterrorism force? What are we willing to accept or not accept in terms of facing or a large security cooperation office at the embassy? These are all questions that have to be answered. Every option that we look at is going to come with risks. There is no silver bullet here. So it's really a question of where this president is prepared to accept risk. That's what I'm going to be listening keenly for when he makes that announcement, in the evening, U.S. time today, tomorrow for India. And I'm skeptical that we're going to really have that outlined to any comprehensive degree, but I'm hopeful that at the very least behind the scenes, people are thinking through some of those questions.
All right, 6:30 a.m., 6:35 a.m. IST is when we expect the U.S. President to make that announcement. I'm going to thank you all, Stephen Tangle, G. Parthasarathy, Jonathan Lande, and Ray Locker. And for our viewers, do catch the latest updates and analysis. We are bringing you a special broadcast tomorrow, 6 a.m. onwards, only on WION.